Hello, everyone. I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome you to this event today on building solidarity with progressive struggles in Latin America. It's hosted by Labour Friends of Progressive Latin America and supported by a wide range of solidarity organisations as part of the ongoing Arise festival, an online festival of left ideas. You can still buy a ticket for the festival or donate, and we've got an amazing closing event coming up on Wednesday. We've had hundreds of thousands of social media views, thousands of registrations, and tens of thousands of people join our events. And that's because of a collective action to put forward socialist ideas that our movement of world need more now more than ever. So I'm Sam Browse. I'm from Labour Friends of Progressive Latin America, and I'm also an Arise Festival volunteer. All around the world, we're going through a major crisis in terms of the ongoing pandemic, deepening climate catastrophe, and in parts of the world, now a major cost of living crisis. And those of us on the left need to put forward the ways to transform our world and put people, health, and planet first in order to win the argument. Part of this has to be changing the way that the world is ordered and structured and standing up to those leaders who globally promote the policies of war, hatred, and division. And this also means standing with those movements across the world and governments who are fighting for a better way, a world where public need comes before corporate greed. That has to mean progressive international cooperation on the left. And that's why we're delighted to have this global platform today and to be building links between the left in Britain and the left in Latin America, which has made some real vital gains in recent times that I hope we'll hear about today. Those gains should certainly be an inspiration to us all. So we've seen election victories in Mexico, Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Honduras, Colombia, and more. And we've seen Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela stand up against illegal US sanctions and blockades. So the event today is a celebration of our mutual values of peace, internationalism, and unity, and about the crucial work of building links of solidarity with each other. I've got to say too that due to the amazing level of interest, as well as the Zoom webinar, we're streaming live directly on Arise YouTube page, which you should all give a follow, and will be posted in the chat, I'm sure, and across various Facebook pages as well. So we're beaming out across the internet. I'm really thrilled today to introduce our first high-profile speaker, and it's such an honour to have such a high-profile speaker with us today. And from such an important struggle as well. That's Rodolfo Pastor, who I think is on the call now, Secretary of the Presidency in Honduras. Rodolfo, over to you, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Sam. I'm going to have to excuse myself because I've got a case of COVID, and I'm trying to feel better, but I'm not going to open my video because I would look miserable. I appreciate the invitation to speak to you, all of the audience, and to be a part of this festival. I really do believe in the core importance of solidarity and in how we should stay connected through different parts of the world and pay attention to what's going on, even if it's a little farther from where we're accustomed, because I do think that we live in such an interconnected world nowadays that we're all impacted by what's happening elsewhere, and it makes sense to stay in touch and to see how we can help others in times of need. It's certainly been the case here in Honduras for a long time, more than a decade, that we have been going through a rough period of our history, a dark period of our history, as a result of a coup that happened in mid-2009, and since then established a dictatorship which ruled Honduras for these last 12 years, and did so in a very classical authoritarian repressive manner, benefiting a very small group of people, and also doing so at the cost of human rights and natural resources in our country. We were elected, the government of President Xiomara Castro was elected in late 2021 as a result of a major effort by the people of Honduras, and with the support of many fabulous people around the world who resisted that dictatorship and who collectively demanded that some level of democracy be restored in Honduras. Throughout these last 12 years, we have had the support of many of you who have helped us make this crisis in Honduras visible around the world, and even going against the strong currents of major media, which tried insistently to deceive the rest of the world about what was truly going on here in Honduras. So we were elected to the executive branch, and we've since made a number of important efforts to try to start rebuilding a country that was left in ruins. And by this, I can refer to very specific, concrete details, like the fact that we have a country where, despite being highly in debt, we're talking about a debt that goes beyond 50% of our GDP. We're talking about more than $20 billion for such a small country like Honduras, for such a poor country like Honduras. This is something that we will have to pay for generations to come. And yet, despite this debt, we have a collapsed health system, a collapsed public education system. We have, deteriorated infrastructure, and worst of all, we have a very, very dilapidated institutional system. So we have a very weak democratic system that is trying to survive. And from the executive branch, we are still confronted with a judicial branch that has remained under the control of this dictatorship. It's important to mention that the dictatorship and the repression and corruption that went on for such a long period of time was able to stay in power because of the support that it had from, basically empire. And it's ironic that as a result of this triumph of the people in the recent elections, we now see a former dictator who has been extradited to the US to be held accountable for the crimes that he committed against the US as part of his close involvement in narco trafficking. And yet we have a major debt with Hondurans in terms of the crimes that he committed against Honduras. And we hope that at some point we get a chance to hold him accountable, and many, many more accountable, for all the crimes and corruption that costed Honduras thousands of lives, not only in direct assassinations, but also in the fact that we were by no means ready for a pandemic with a health system that had been dilapidated for more than a decade, and therefore was in no capacity to confront this pandemic. And so, I think that it's very revealing of the way that power and geopolitics work in our modern world, to witness a 21st century dictatorship that can come to power through the brutal force of weapons and count with the support of empire and stay in power despite its systematic abuses of human rights. We're still dealing with so many of the remnants of that dictatorship, and it will take years to rebuild from the ruins that we have received. We would be successful as this 4-year government. We're 6 months into this 4-year term if we are able to put off the fires and organize our country minimally in order to start this project of rebuilding our republic. And we're still fighting such perverse intentions as the sedes. The sedes are the special economic zones that have been given in concession for decades to these business people who come in and invest in creating these states within our state at a cost to our sovereignty and our territory and our human and natural resources. So the fight and the struggle continues, and it is very important for us to count on the support of the many people that have supported us throughout the years, and also to keep denouncing the powers that be and the way that they confront and affect our capacity to develop our own democracies and protect our rights and our sovereignty. So I think that it's like I said at the beginning, so important and so inspiring to be connected, to stay connected, because if anything has been very clear since the coup and until now is that the right is very well organized, the right is very well connected, and in order to be able to stand against our adversaries and succeed against such powerful people, we also need to stay connected, and we need to be organized, and that, I believe, is what solidarity is all about. So thank you again so much for this opportunity, and I look forward to listening to other panelists and sharing more ideas.
Thank you, Rodolfo, and hope you're well seen as well. And I know, just again, I remember personally being in solidarity meetings in 2009 over what happened in Honduras and the coup then, and so it really is inspiring. The election of Xiomara Castro was a real kind of inspiring turning of the tide, and to see that happen was amazing. So thanks so much for joining us, and best wishes to you, and hope you're well seen. Our next speaker is Rafaela Molina from Wiphalas across the world. He's here to tell us about the advances in democracy and social progress that are taking place in Bolivia, and again a kind of fantastic recent turnaround too, from a coup d'etat that a year later was reversed. So I'm going to hand over to Rafaela to talk about Wiphalas across the world and Bolivia. Over to you.
Yes, hello, and thank you very much for organizing this space. I agree with the representative of Honduras, and I share my solidarity too. I think dialogue and solidarity between countries of Latin America and with the world are necessary to continue advancing and resisting together this global system. And I want to briefly share what has happened in Bolivia in recent years, our resistance, and the hope for the change that are taking place in Latin America. Something that we Bolivians thought was a thing of the past happened again. 3 years ago, we suffered a coup d'etat. Due to its renewed and sophisticated strategy, many people and institutions failed to recognize it at the beginning. A conspiracy involving the organization of the American States as a tool of the United States government, the agro-industrial sector of my country, right-wing parties, para-police mercenary groups, and foreign governments included the United Kingdom, the European Union, and Brazil was able to seize power, oust Evo Morales, and install Janine Áñez instead, without any legitimacy to do so. It was actually a neoliberal restoration. This neoliberal restoration coup was consolidated, which represented the period of the greatest economic, political, social regression and violence of the last 2 decades. Earlier in this period, 37 people were killed by de facto government after signing a decree absolving the military of blame into a crackdown of protests. Thousands of people were persecuted and imprisoned for their political affinity, while indigenous people were beaten and humiliated. Shameless corruption permitted the whole government to the point of profiteering even from health supplies at the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic. Because they wanted to dismantle the plurinational state and return to the colonial republic, racism was part of the vision for the country. Therefore, segregation and the right to denigrate and exercise supremacist violence against indigenous peoples and their symbols were part of what they wanted to bring from the past. One example was the systematic destruction of the Wiphalas, a flag that represents the indigenous people of several communities in Latin America. And it's an official patriotic symbol of Bolivia under the Constitution. Almost immediately, the resistance to this violent and imperialist attack was organized, and the Wiphala was revitalized as a symbol of resistance and defiance in light of the hatred it generated during the coup. As part of this resistance, Wiphalas across the world was born. This collective, initially formed by Bolivians residing in all parts of the world, grew organically to disseminate reliable information, denounce abuses, and support this resistance to the coup. I am proud to say that I am representative of this group in this event, and I want to express my deep appreciation to all the brothers and sisters that were part of it. I am ecstatic to report that after a long year of struggle, the social movements and popular classes managed to restore democracy, forcing the regime to the polls and electing a legitimate government that will rebuild a country with sovereignty. This peaceful return to the rule of law after a consolidated coup is unprecedented in Latin America. Now, in Bolivia, the economy is recovering. We have one of the lowest inflation rates of the world, and we're moving with sovereignty towards the industrialization of lithium and rebuilding what the coup plotters tried to destroy. Just over a week ago, thousands of indigenous farmers, majority women, were given land titles to where they have been cultivating for years. This is part of the economic revolution in the plurinational state of Bolivia. We encourage you all to put Bolivia in your agenda and support. Bolivia leads the way in how the coexistence of nations putting people before profit is possible. However, attempts at destabilization continue in my country and in other Latin American countries, as we hear from Honduras. This is why we need to be even more alert with the winds progressive chants that are beginning to run on the continent. With the recent triumph of Gustavo Petro in Colombia and the anticipated win of Lula in Brazil in the coming months, we're living in a new wave of left-wing progressive governance that should open a golden age of Latin American integration. This brings many expectations, many opportunities, and hopes for the region. For us, it is extremely important to keep contributing to the resistance to the fighting in return of a new type of fascism that is being promoted in many parts of the world. We are in a historical moment in which internationalism is very important in the globalized world. It was very important during the resistance to the coup in Bolivia, and it will be indispensable in the coming years when Latin America, especially while the United States try to regain an imperialist control of the region for selfish economic and geopolitical interest. This is why we deeply appreciate this space and call for strengthening our solidarity support and joint resistance that allow us to continue weaving networks to fight against the unsustainable capitalist war system. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rafaela. That's a really kind of valuable contribution, I think. I think certainly my experience of, again, talking to people in the UK about Latin American politics is certainly people don't realise what the racism of the sort of the neoliberals in across the continent, and yeah, especially in Bolivia as well. So thanks so much for that contribution. And again, it's inspiring to see such a kind of turnaround as well, and now Bolivia leading the way. Before I turn to our next speaker, I want to bring in Matt Willgrass, who is an Arise Festival organizer, just to do a little plug for kind of future events in the conference. So Matt, can I bring you in now, please?
Thank you, Sam, and thank you everyone for joining us, both our speakers and the participants. I can see hundreds of people on Zoom, hundreds of people on Facebook, and even a fair number on Twitter, which I always find quite a commitment to watch the meeting on Twitter. Thank you also just to everyone who's been to anything in Arise Festival. This is over the 30th event in this month-long festival of left ideas. And as Sam said, it has been remarkable how many people have joined us at different events and at different parts of the festival. And it's been so great, especially to have these big international sessions, whether it be in solidarity with people of Palestine, whether it be to talk about the steps we've taken, solidarity with moves to United Ireland, or whether it be this discussion tonight, building links with the left in Latin America. The plugs are for future events are nearly over, as there are only 2 left. There's one at lunchtime tomorrow, and then the main closing event is Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. with John McDonnell and representatives of 5 different unions that are either in action at the moment or moving into industrial action, including the NEU, the FBU, the PCS, and Unison. You can join that discussion on building resistance, unity through struggle on Wednesday. And in particular, please do donate to Arise. I know that someone gets on and says this at every call, but it is important. It costs hundreds of pounds to put on any one of these individual sessions. The whole thing has cost thousands of pounds. If you can donate £10 or whatever you can afford on this call, if 20 or 30 people did that on each of the bigger calls, then that would enable us to further expand our operation. And any extra money we do raise will go towards organising a physical festival, hopefully again next year, as well as maintaining this online programme of events. So please do donate £10 or what you can. I can see some coming in now, both from the UK and abroad. If you can donate £10, please do. And I hope to see you at the closing event on Wednesday. Thank you, Sam.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so as Matt says, definitely please hit that donate link and offer what you can. As Matt said, we're people powered. The whole festival is people powered. It relies on people like you who come on the calls. So yeah, thanks, Matt. Also worth saying as well, we've got a few people from all over the place on the call today. We've got people from Cheshire, Northampton, McKinley, Vauxhall, Shropshire, Manchester, Peckham, Birmingham, Liverpool, Buckinghamshire, and also Indonesia and Norway. So we're reaching across the world and across the UK, which is fantastic. I want to bring in our next speaker now. Our next speaker is Mickey Brady, Sinn Fein MP and a fantastic and great internationalist and a member of a previous delegation to Venezuela, which I'm sure he will tell us about now. Mickey, over to you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Right, thanks very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, fantastic.
I just want to say, Carja, first of all, thanks very much for inviting me to speak this evening, and to all the organisers of the Arise Festival for all the hard work that they do behind the scenes. I've been asked to speak about Venezuela and my experience there. I was invited to go to the Constituent Assembly election campaign in July 2017. I was one of 45 international observers. Acting in this capacity, I sought to ensure and maintain international confidence in what was a crucial election for the Venezuelan people. And so we monitored the election. And in total, if I recall correctly, we visited 6 polling stations. And certainly I could not see how anyone could be fraudulent or trick the system that was in place. The checks and balances for the actual voter were much more thorough and protected than we would have in our own voting systems. And I consider what I saw, and I can only go by what I saw, to be fair and equitable. Funny, one of the things that happened when I was there, I was getting emails, texts and phone calls from Ireland, from my wife, family and friends, saying, is everything all right? Because we're seeing there's a lot of trouble in Venezuela. This was on the news and the media. And as someone who comes from the 6 counties in the north of Ireland, I was well used and I'm well used to seeing trouble. But I didn't see anything like that. What I did see and what I heard was that the riots and the arrests were taking place in middle class areas. It was nowhere near where we were staying. And we were showing very graphic photographs of people being set on fire because they were Chavistas. And it seemed to be looking at that, agent provocateurs were very much at work. And obviously it serves American interest to have a country that is being manipulated by extreme right wing. And that's how it seemed. As a Sinn Féin MP, as an Irish Republican, I know the damage that external interference can cause and the conflict that it can stir up. And we've been dealing with it for 800 years now, at least. Unfortunately, recent years have seen a sustained outside meddling in the affairs of Venezuela from various quarters. And when I went in 2017, I went in the provision that only the people of Venezuela should determine the future direction of their country and nobody else. Sinn Féin is totally opposed to any outside intervention. And those of my generation will remember the coup against Chile's Salvador Allende. And being no doubt, such interventions are still being carried out. The techniques might be harder to spot and they may be more subtle, but it's still going on. And I'm sure some of us have heard in recent weeks when John Bolton, former CIA station chief and national security advisor to Trump, let him slip that he had helped plan coups d'etat in other countries. And of course, the establishment would always deny any involvement in destabilization. It is only ever when the archives are published years later we get to see their hands-on on those situations. And given Ireland's history, we feel that Dublin needs to do more to stand firmly as a voice for the colonialised people and oppressed of the world. Unfortunately, people in Ireland can often still be stuck in the colonial mindset, particularly at government level in Dublin. What we've had in the Irish state is Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, two conservative right-wing parties. We've had them for 100 years. Now you think you've had it bad in Britain. Ireland has never, ever had any other government than a conservative government. And to be honest, they're not much better than what's going on at the moment across the water. So in terms of foreign policy, we've seen successive Dublin governments cozy up to NATO, sign up to Partnership for Peace, and sign up for EU battle groups. There's a lack of confidence to stand up to world powers and say, no, actually, you're wrong in this. Ireland needs to stand firmly as a voice for the colonised and the oppressed of the world. It needs to stand on the side of the poor and marginalised and not on the side of those who are stripping the planet of its resources for the benefit of the few. And that is why we believe the Irish government needs to improve its bilateral trade and political relationship with progressive governments in Latin America. At its high point, the Venezuelan revolution provided a powerful stimulus to the growth of left-wing and revolutionary tendencies both in Latin America and internationally. The progressive political and social movements which it nurtured led the way in delivering better standards of education and healthcare across the region. And I was able to see some of that and the effects of that when I was there. Inspiring meaningful initiatives to tackle poverty, inequality, and racism throughout the rest of Latin America. But perhaps the most important gain was more intangible. From my observations and conversations, the revolution seemed to give the ordinary people of Venezuela a long-lost sense of dignity, a sense of justice, and a renewed sense of confidence in their own power. As Hugo Chavez once said, no part of the human community can live entirely on its own planet with its own laws of motion, cut off from the rest of humanity. Internationalism has always formed a core component of what it means to be an Irish Republican, and for that reason I consider myself a proud internationalist. Our individual struggles for emancipation are bound to fail if we, at the same time, do not forge strong bonds of fraternal solidarity and cooperation. We must build a renewed international movement against imperialism and capitalism worldwide. That's why we must champion the truth and educate people on what is really taking place in Venezuela and beyond. Sometimes when we hear the phrase Latin America, ask yourself what comes to mind. Well, if you were to believe all that is spouted in the Western media, it would visualize an entire continent of drugs, soccer, poverty, dictatorships, and economic crisis. But we know this isn't the real Latin America. And while there are difficulties and strains that are often associated with colonialism, oppression, and poverty, in reality, Latin America is a land of exciting social movements, rich culture, inspirational resistance, and genuine people power. After battling against right-wing dictatorships and outside interference since the beginning of the 20th century, the full potential of Latin American politics is only just now emerging. The progressive struggles that we now see gaining ground provide us with a fresh perspective and hope against the tired questions of globalization, climate change, and tackling hunger. Sinn Fein will also stand firmly on the side of the colonized and the oppressed, as we uphold the principles of democracy, human rights, and self-determination, and oppose poverty, inequality, imperialism, and oppression. Ultimately, more unites us than divides us. When interviewed by reporters, Che Guevara's father said of his restless son, the first thing to note is that in my son's veins flows the blood of the Irish rebels. That is something we in Ireland are very proud of. Let Che's heroic memory and that of Hugo Chavez too provide us with daily reminders of what can be achieved when ordinary people decide that another world is possible. And it is meetings and gathering like today help us reaffirm to all of us too. And once again, thank you for letting me share a few thoughts. So Gurmila Maiga.
Thanks, Vicky. Yeah, absolutely. It's so important too to hear those sort of voices from like people who have been over there, and you know, like because it's black as white and white as black when you hear stuff in the news over here. So yeah,
Well, all our struggles have so much in common.
yeah.
And ours, by the way, ours is still continuing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. A fantastic quote from Shay as well. Thanks so much for that. Okay, so moving on to our next speaker, who, I mean, Mickey talked about John Bolton and the kind of arrogance of that kind of assertion about how he'd organised coups abroad and kind of hiding in plain sight over those sorts of by making those sorts of statements. Next, we have Teri Mattson speaking, who's a Latin America coordinator for CODEPINK. Teri is a peace campaigner from the US who will be addressing why we should be opposing sanctions on Nicaragua. Thanks very much, Teri, for joining us.
Thank you. What an honor to be part of this panel, and I'm so thankful for the invitation to join all of you this evening. It's actually Monday afternoon here in Mexico City, where I'm talking to you from. And I wonder if I could just take a minute before delving specifically into Nicaragua. We can just briefly recap what happened throughout the Americas, starting, let's start with the Bolivian presidential elections in October of 2020, because so much really revealed itself across the hemisphere beginning then. So just briefly, we had presidential elections in Bolivia, December of 2020, National Assembly elections in Venezuela, presidential elections in Ecuador in April of 2021, massive regional elections in Mexico, June of 2021, Nicaragua presidential elections, November 7, 2021, Venezuela regional elections, mid-November 2021, Honduras presidential elections, the end of November, Chile presidential elections, Colombia last month, and we're looking for Brazil in October. I was fortunate enough to be an election observer in 7 of the 8 countries I was invited to, as your next guest can attest, Victor from Colombia. I was invited to Colombia to be an election observer. I was not allowed to enter the country when I got there. But prior to that, I had observed elections in Bolivia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Mexico, Nicaragua, Venezuela again, and Honduras. And I would just share with all of you, and I think that this is a theme that all of us panelists have touched on, is that what we saw through all of these elections, the results really reflected within the people themselves and their countries. People voted for national sovereignty. They voted for natural resource sovereignty, and they voted for governments that were proposing economies for the vast majority of its citizens. So principally voting, and this was a spectrum of economic plans. One step to the left to revolutionary left, some was just, getting rid of massive privatization, and others it was a narrative completely to wipe out neoliberalism. So I think it's really important to understand this massive wave of pushing back against neoliberalism, of pushing back against foreign intervention, and specifically from the United States. And the election results really, really reflected that. It's quite exciting, and it is setting forward what a lot of us are calling, the return of the pink tide. That's, everyone interprets that a little differently. So I have been asked to speak to you specifically about Nicaragua. And of course, Daniel Ortega was reelected president of Nicaragua November 7 of 2021. And I was greatly honored to be there as an election observer, and honored to return to his inauguration in January of this year. One of the things I want to illustrate is the really aggressive US intervention happening in Nicaragua, specifically since April of 2018. And I think the best way to do that is to kind of recap the economic war that is being placed on Nicaragua. We speak a lot about Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, North Korea, but I'm not sure we really talk enough about the economic war against Nicaragua. So first, I think it's important to recognize that last week on the 19th of July, Nicaragua celebrated the 43rd anniversary of the Sandinista revolution and the return of the Ortega government in 2007, after 16 years of neoliberalism. And I bring this up. So President Ortega was reelected in November of last year, but he was first, and this was probably the most important date, first reelected in 2007 after the 16 years of neoliberalism. And I want to highlight this because what Nicaragua had to do in 2007, moving forward to today, was deconstruct the 16 years of neoliberalism before they could move forward as a nation again, as a progressive nation. And this is something that Honduras, as Rodolfo mentioned earlier, Honduras is going to, has started doing, what Colombia is going to need to do with its new president, what we're hoping Brazil is going to have an opportunity to do. And, you know, the vote is still kind of out on where Chile is going to go with its new president. But it's really, really important for those of us who stand in solidarity with these countries is to really understand how much deconstruction has to take place before a nation of people can move forward. And sometimes I think we get a little antsy and a little perhaps overcritical that a newly elected government isn't doing enough, isn't acting fast enough. And we have to respect the election results that the citizens of any specific country have produced, what they want and need, and that it's all going to take time. And I specifically say this because I know there's a lot of criticism coming out of my country that things aren't progressing fast enough. And I think we haven't even managed to successfully lead a revolution in our own country. So kind of hard to be critical of what other people are trying to achieve in their own. But this deconstruction that has to take place first is really, really important to embrace and support and see that happen, and then move forward. So now let me just briefly run through, I know I only have 7 minutes, Sam, I think. So it's what this economic war against Nicaragua looks like. And I want to start with last week, because last week was the 43rd anniversary of the revolution, and that was on the 19th. And on the 20th, Nicaragua was added to what we in the United States refer to as the angle list. Let me tell you briefly what that is. So this is, the Angles list is the Northern Triangle Enhanced Engagement Act. And this was made into law December 22nd, 2020. The legislation has two components. It requires the publication of a list of corrupt and undemocratic actors from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras who will be denied entry to the United States. And it requires the creation of a 5-year strategy from the Secretary of State and USAID on efforts to advance prosperity, combat corruption, strengthen democratic governance, and improve civilian security in the Northern Triangle. So all that, you know, typical rhetoric that I'm sure all of you are familiar with coming out of Washington. In the original act, Nicaragua was not included, but since November 2021, since the November elections in November, the Biden administration now has included Nicaragua. And what happened last week on the 20th was Nicaragua was put on the Angles list. And one of the repercussions of that is that it's further denial of for Nicaraguans to visas to enter the United States, principally people associated with the Ortega family and the Ortega government. But also what has happened is an economic move came out of being put on the Angles list. And this was denying a preferential tariff for Nicaraguans to import their sugar to the United States. So this was, another little tit for tat economic pressure. The sugar producers in Nicaragua are principally private and are principally, I don't want to say oligarchy because that's too strong of a word, but private business people, and they're not going to specifically suffer much financially being denied this lower tariff to send their sugar to the United States. One country that's going to be looking for their sugar is Poland, which apparently there is no sugar in Poland right now because of the sanctions on Russia. So as some things unfold negatively, some things are unfolding, positively with these sanctions. But I think it's important just to understand these little tit for tats that are going on specific to the government that the Nicaraguan people have elected for themselves. I also should mention, just on a very personal level, because I don't think this is often included when we think about sanctions in general for any country. I was invited to attend the July 19 celebration in Managua, and looking at flights, it is astronomically, at least for me, right now, it wasn't in the past, to fly from the States and or Mexico into Managua. And that is one of the things that you look at as a form of diminishing the tourism industry in Nicaragua, and not just Nicaragua. I think, we look at how difficult it is to get flights into Venezuela and Cuba too. So it does have, an economic effect as much as just sending, a negative message about the country to the Western population. So that's just a little personal thing to keep in mind when you're making travel plans, that some of these costs are specifically put in place to deter economic development. And for Nicaragua, tourism is a huge economic engine that they are trying to rebuild since COVID, and airfares, of course, are making it extraordinarily expensive to go. So what else should I tell you? I'm going to kind of make a quick rollback of everything that has happened since the April 18 coup attempt in Nicaragua. And I think that will help you see how aggressive this economic war is against Nicaragua. So in June 13, 2022, the US State Department imposed visa restrictions on additional 93 individuals coming out of Nicaragua, principally again related to the Ortega family, Ortega businesses, and anyone related to the state. August 18 of 2021, the United States said it would refuse visas to, at that time, 50 Nicaraguans linked to Daniel Ortega's government in response to its in a run-up to the elections in November. And July 12 of 2021, another set of visa denials. And then I think most significantly in 2021 was in March, when the Nica Act, which is reinforcing Nicaragua, get this name, reinforcing Nicaragua's adherence to conditions for Electoral Reform Act of 2021. This was introduced to the United States Senate and House of Representatives in March of 2021. It was introduced simultaneously. And some of the elements in that act include restrictions on international financial institutions relating to Nicaragua. So cutting off Nicaragua's access to international finance, and it was and then targeted financial sanctions to advance quote unquote democratic elections. So this was March of 2021. The timeline in the Nica Act in both the House and the Senate was, it gave the Nicaragua government 180 days to conform, and then the U.S. government would not pursue turning the proposed act into legislation. So this is introduced in March of 2021, and the outline is 180 days. Okay, so it was 180 days, so it was really, really clear that this was a form of electoral interference. And then I should also just say, probably the most important thing prior to that was in December of 2018 when the Nica Act was put into place by the U.S. government. In Nicaragua, The Nica Act is Nicaragua Human Acts and Anti-Corruption Act of 2018, which really put access to the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank, made it very difficult for Nicaragua to participate in those lending programs. And all of this, I would say, because it's finance oriented, it's very clear that with the return of the Ortega government in 2017, and with their vision of a progressive economy for all the people, backing off of neoliberalism, republicizing, moving things that were privatized in the neoliberal years back into the public sector. These are all tools to prevent that from happening, or their attempts. It is still happening. And, you know, and the Nicaragua people and their government continue to move forward in defiance of the North. And they really deserve our support. And I think the best way you could possibly do that is to go see them, see what they're achieving for themselves and their country. The economic development is profound for all levels of society. And also just to see how beautiful the people and the country are, and to support their tourism industry as a form of breaking this sanctions warfare against the people and government of Nicaragua. So I know, Sam, I probably talked a little too much.
No, thank you.
But you know I love Nicaragua and her people. So,
well, it is also important to kind of, you know, to say what those things like flights are that feel relatively innocuous, actually the massive impact they have on the way an economy can work and the human impact they have on people. So no, thank you so much.
It's such a direct attack on what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that very detailed kind of analysis of the history of sanctions. I'm now going to move to our next speaker, who is Victor de Currea Lugo, who is a Colombian journalist, who we're hoping will reflect on another recent fantastic electoral victory in Latin America. So Victor, over to you, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really glad with the result of the last election in Colombia. Let me share with you some ideas about neoliberalism. First of all, for us, neoliberalism is not just an economic model, it's an ideological model. And it means how we see, how we perceive the world, how we interact each other is based on indicator, is based on results, is based on efficacy, and there is no space for the dignity of human being. Second one, we recognize a lot of human rights in our constitution in 1981. Unfortunately, in the same constitution, they opened the door for a market model, what is really sad. Now we won the election in the last campaign, as you may know, and now we have a big debate. The debate is if we accept its so-called neoliberal peace or social peace. As you may know, we have had an armed conflict in the last 60 years. Unfortunately, the peace process has been based on this kind of neoliberal model. Let me explain what it means, neoliberal peace. Means out of context, as well as the companies, as well as the model, neoliberal model works in a laboratory out from the reality, the peace built in this logic doesn't take into account the causes of the conflict, doesn't take into account the context of the conflict, the history of the human being, the citizenship, the social agenda. The only important is to give results. That's why the neoliberal peace is an approach which insists too much in the disarm, demobilization, and reincorporation of the former guerrilla members, but not about the reforms who lack of is the cause of the conflict. That's why we insist too much that it's not matter just simple to demobilize the guerrilla groups. We have had different peace process in the last 20, 30 years, but we continue still in the middle of the conflict. Why? Because the causes of the conflict, like the land property, like the participation of the political scenarios, has been not allowed to the people. You know, here we have some last names which are the same year by year. The same families govern the country. The same elites are deciding everything. But finally, after 200 years and 12, I'm not exaggerating, 200 years and 12, for the first time in our history, we have a government that can be called progressive or leftist or a decent government. It's amazing. For us, it was really a party. You cannot imagine people crying, screaming in the streets because we get finally some kind of democracy. The president elected is Gustavo Petro. He was a former guerrilla member. He took the weapons in the 80s, and after he took part in the parliament during the last year. Our vice president is even more amazing. She's her name is Francia Marquez. Once talking to her in a big national strike last year, I say to her that she had four problems, but problems with quotation. First of all, she's a woman. Second one, she's black. Third one, she's from a poor family. And fourth, she's from a rural area, not the center of the country. And these Colombian countries, machism, classist, racist, and centralized country. And exactly these four problems of Francia is exactly what we need, because it's the solution, is the confrontation of the power established. Now, the expressions used by Gustavo Petro when he accepted his triumph in the election was clear. Our compromise, our commitment is for the social peace. What it means? To include the causes of the conflict means the land property in Colombia, the lack of political inclusion, the recognition of our history of struggle, the need of justice and inclusion. And in this model, we have a social peace, contrary to neoliberal peace. And some of the new minister has been named in this way. For instance, in the health sector, that is one of my area of studies, now is an important leader of the social civil society working to reform the national health sector in order to guarantee right to health to the population. But also the new Minister of Defense. Our new Minister of Defense is a guy who was persecuted years ago by the former government because he denounced the level of impunity and crimes committed by the armed forces. And now with the defense of minister, the Minister of Defense, sorry. And also our Minister of Culture is a long experimented actress, and she's a social leader of the cultural arena, but also she was really involved in the political issues, and she was part of the political party called Patriotic Union. In the past decades, more than 5,000 leaders of this organization were killed between the paramilitaries and the military organizations in Colombia. And also our, well, I can be a long time talking about, but the most important is the message is the real, we have a real hope because our president, our vice president, our the minister, and we want to work to organize a comprehensive agreement of peace where will be included all the different groups in order to guarantee a real peace, but not just to disarm the groups, is to guarantee the condition, the social, the economic, the political condition that avoid people coming back to the mountain to take the weapon. But let me finalize, say, what means peace for the Colombian people. Peace means work, education, health. It means dignity. And now already my finish. What do we need in terms of solidarity for all people who is listening to us? First of all, ask your government, push your government to respect our decision, our sovereignty as a Colombian people. Please, usually the British government, the USA government want to put their nose in our business. Please respect our decision, our self-determination. Second one, we have to discuss internationally about the illegal drugs. We are killing each other in Colombia because of the drugs, but the money goes to the international bank circuit. And I think that it's necessary to open a real discussion about the illegal drugs, about the impact on our countries, especially because some sectors, including myself, are asking for the legalization of the drugs in order to break the business, because the problem is not the drug, the problem is the business. We need to support against the potential escalate of fake news against our government, and also, why not, an economical measure against our new government, as we saw against Nicaragua, Cuba, Venezuela, and Chile in the 70s. And please push your governments to support our comprehensive peace agreement. And finally, one of the points that is on the table of the discussion of the new government with the USA is to review the free trade agreement. We believe that it's necessary to reconsider this kind of agreement which affected seriously our economy, our rural economy, and the incomes of the farmer. Means, please help us criticize our mistakes, support our efforts, and come to Colombia, please. Come to Colombia, and I promise you to be your guide and to show the best of our country, especially our people. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Victor. And there you go. That's your program of Colombia Solidarity laid out for you by Victor. Get involved, definitely. Yeah, and go to Colombia and get involved in pressuring the government to review things like the free trade agreement. Thanks so much, Victor, for joining us. Before I go to our final speaker, I just want to thank everyone for participating today. We know the left movements in Latin America have important battles ahead, and also know how essential events like this are to building understanding and doing the kind of solidarity work that Victor just mentioned in the UK. So please do get involved with campaigns on the vital issues that we've discussed today, and show your support to Labour Friends of Progressive Latin America, the organisation I'm with, including through following us on social media. You can see the links in the chat, and please support Arise Festival too. Just to reiterate Matt's call for donations earlier on, please donate £10 or whatever you can afford, or come to the closing event as well. Again, the details of the closing event are in the chat. We've got to keep working together to insist there's no return to business as usual when it comes to our economy and politics, and to not only argue that a better world is possible, but to win that better world. And a key part of that, an integral, fundamental part of that, is our anti-war internationalism and standing in solidarity with progressive forces in Latin America. So Viva la solidaridad, and I'll hand over to our final speaker, who is Nathalia Urban of Brasilwire, who'll tell us about the prospects, fantastic prospects and exciting prospects of a Lula victory in Brazil, and the dangers that might face and is facing, and what we can do again to offer practical solidarity. So Nathalia, I'll give you the last words of the session. And thanks so much, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me here. And even though you have such a positive things to say about Brazil, what I have to say here tonight is not positive at all. We still have a long way, even though there's only 70 days until the next elections. Brazil's in panic because we don't know if the elections will actually happen, because since last year, Bolsonaro keeps threatening to cancel the elections, to undermine the electoral process in Brazil. And now more than ever, and especially after last week when he called out several ambassadors to give them a presentation showing how the electoral system in Brazil was flawed and the elections would be fabricated against him. We are extremely terrified that Bolsonaro is going to try to do something to undermine what we so long have been working, that is to remove him from power and having Lula da Silva again as our president. Even though the polls are showing that Lula is 13 points ahead, we cannot rest, and we are still working very hard to not just having Lula elected, but to have the elections to happen, and also to denounce the amount of political violence that has been happening in Brazil. 2 weeks ago, a treasurer of a local branch of PT, Workers' Party, Lula's party, has been killed by a fanatical supporter of Bolsonaro, because Bolsonaro have been instigated his supporters to do some sort of January 6th in Brazil, to radicalize people, to make people become violent against, especially against the Workers' Party members, but also against everybody that doesn't agree with what he's been saying or praying in Brazil. People are not just hopeful to remove Bolsonaro, but also hopeful to once again have been living in a country where we can all dream about a better future. Because nowadays we have 30 million Brazilians living in a state of food insecurity, which is completely the opposite of the legacy that Lula gave us. That is Lula removed people from the hunger. Lula gave people dignity, and now we are seeing the opposite. Bolsonaro is not just stripping Brazilians of their dignity, but Bolsonaro is stripping Brazil from everything, from the democratic processes to debates, to the opportunity to dream on better things for everybody, especially regarding the basic necessities. And of course, we are living through times of global warming and climate crisis, and we cannot have someone that is doing shady deals with Elon Musk to mining and monitoring the Amazon in power again in Brazil. We are seeing a record number of deforestation. We have been seeing a record number of illegal mining, of the death of indigenous people, of the death of Afro-Brazilians in the favelas, and no one is doing anything and saying anything, because Bolsonaro was the establishment party candidate once. Bolsonaro was what they wanted for Brazil. And this is something that even though we are here among the left, but I will never be able to forgive the imperial powers that once put Bolsonaro there, that removed illegally Dilma from power, that stripped so many Brazilians from their dignity and their lives, because we have over 500,000 deaths due to the tragic way Bolsonaro dealt with COVID. So what can I say right now is, and ask everybody that is watching, is to write to your MPs to make a big noise in order to make international pressure for the elections in Brazil to actually happen. Otherwise, we will be stuck with Bolsonaro, but in a worse way than what is happening right now. So thank you so much for having me here tonight. And Lula 2022 is our goal, as what we are all wishing right now.
Thanks, Nathalia, and thanks all for joining us today. And hopefully you can make it to the final Arise session. It's been a great meeting, and see you later in the month.